And thank you, Francois. He does exaggerate a shade, but that's all right. Woody Allen sometimes says success is 80% turning up, showing up. I want to mention some people who showed up, starting with Francois Corin. I was in his office one day, and he said, "I'm going to hold a conference in your honor." And I came close to falling off the chair. But the one thing about Francois, he doesn't just talk ideas. He shows up. And not only Francois, but his colleagues showed up. Especially, I want to mention in particular, this organization of this particular event, Hélène Giroux, and all the other activities that Danielle Robichaud, incredible. I think they showed up. So did you. And so I think we've had a really wonderful conference. It's been an uncanny experience for me, I have to tell you the honest to God's truth, to meet up with the ghost of myself. It's a bit like Dickens, you know. There's Stefan Blaschke, who's describing a conversation between Nicholas Luhmann and myself. They sound fascinating. I must read up on them soon. Is Jim Taylor a Buddhist? You know, I never do that. People do have a way of surprising you, don't they? Is Jim Taylor a magician? I like that. That's Mark Van Vuuren. As a kid growing up, I used to be a fan of a comic strip called Mandrake the Magician. And I thought, that's nice. And then Linda this afternoon. Linda, I have to explain something to you. I'm not any fancy theorist. I'm just a country boy. You saw the pictures last night. Hugging a lamb, shooting bears. You know, the bears eat the lambs. That's why I shoot the bears so they don't eat the lambs. That's another illustration of what we call dichotomous thinking. But now I finally begin to understand a little bit of what Derrida meant when he talked about a restance. Clearly, I've been meeting a restance of myself, a residue, a leftover, a trace. I think trace is probably the best term, or even an artifact, or maybe an avatar. I don't know. Anyway, whoever this guy is, I don't always agree with him. Sometimes I don't even recognize him, which is something to do perhaps with age, because increasingly I'm finding it hard to recognize anybody. So I have to ask myself, which is me? Or is there a me? That's Boris's question haunts me. Maybe there isn't any me. Anyway, this conference has been so exciting. I do see it as an incredible opening up of the field of organizational communication, and I make no apology for identifying myself as somebody in organizational communication. One of the great things, by the way, is that everybody who's here doesn't come from a field that they call organizational communication. As Francois pointed out, we've got people here from 18 different countries, but it's not just that, from many different disciplines. My whole perspective is dominated by the notion of communication and its relationship to organization. I think there's an even greater reason for excitement because of, I think, 18 countries, 18 different countries, and I believe we missed one or two. I heard somebody, I think it was Barbara, in the background saying, "You left out Poland." In other words, this is a terribly exciting thing for me because I deeply believe in the importance of going across boundaries and bringing in establishing a wider conversation. And I think that this conference has demonstrated to what extent that is truly happening And I believe it's so exciting. Thank you. I called my text Organizational Communication at the Crossroads. It's not the first time I've really thought of communication as being at the crossroads, organizational communication at the crossroads. I think the first time was probably in the 60s when people like Charles Redding, Lee Thayer, Phil Tompkins actually made the field out of not much. There was another crossroads in the early 80s, in 1981, I think, at what has become really historic encounter in Utah, at Alta, Utah, when the Young Turks in the field led a kind of palace revolt. That was when the field began to shake itself free from all the positivist domination that had existed to that point, and opened it up to approaches that were more interpretive and more critical. We had a third crossroads, I believe, in the early 1990s. For me, the defining moment was Ruth Smith's ICA presentation in 1993. And in her talk, she reported on her doctoral dissertation, which she looked back at the literature on how people had conceptualized the relationship between communication and organization. Most people, these are people in the field of communication, most people thought of communication, organizational communication, as what goes on in an organization. In French, that would be la communication dans l'organisation. As Ruth then began to look at this, and what she said was, you know, that's to treat an organization as if it were an object like any other, like a skyscraper or a building of some kind, or anyway, an enclosure within which some things are happening. So she tried to imagine alternative conceptions, such as which produces which. Communication produces organization, or organization produces communication. She asked whether perhaps it was equivalent. And she didn't really come up with an answer, and nobody else at that moment did. I had a crack at responding to her question in 1995 in an article that was called, I think, Communication Theory on the Cusp. Communication on Theory on the Cusp, Communication Theory at the Crossroads. I can't have a one-track mind. But you see, what Ruth had said was basically what Gertrude Stein said about Oakland, California. What Stein said about Oakland was, there is no there. And we've heard this morning from Bruno Latour, who has persuasively argued, once again, that in fact there is no there. The there is in fact here, in our own communication.